It's November 13th, 2003. I'm in Green Township, Ohio with Robert Doolan. Robert, if you could please tell us where and when you were born.
I was born March 21st, 1917 in what's known as the west end of Cincinnati. It was down in the basin of the city where most people started, and then we moved either farther out into the suburbs. But I was born in 1917. Lived down there for 6 years, went to kindergarten down there, and then my parents moved up about 3 miles west of what's called Price Hill. And they bought a home there, and I lived there until I went into the Army in 1941. I went to grade school at Holy Family Parochial School, and I got a scholarship to St. Xavier High School, which was downtown. Rode a streetcar every day to go to school, and graduated in 1935. In civilian life, I did office work for an insurance agency. Always interested in airplanes, and I was one of 2 children. My parents had 2 children. I have an older sister who is 93 now, and she and I are the only 2 children, and we're both still alive. When Lindbergh flew the ocean in 1910, I knew I had to fly. And when I was old enough, in 1940, you had to have college to get to be an Army pilot. And no one in Price Hill had gone to college at that time. This was Depression, and that was not the most affluent neighborhood. But in 1940, they relaxed the requirement if you could do a comparative examination. So I took that examination and was approved for pilot training. And I went to pilot training on August 1941. And I had never been farther than 100 miles from home. And I got on a train on a Thursday morning, and Sunday noon I got off, and I was looking at palm trees, sunny California. And I was a replacement for a man who had been brought there 10 days before, and he fainted when they gave him an inoculation, so they sent him home. So I was replacing him, so I didn't have any preparation at all. Monday afternoon I was flying. I was there for 10 weeks, and I was happy. I paid me $75 a month, and I was flying every day. It was wonderful. I learned to fly well enough for civilian pilot, but it never became natural. I get up once in a while now, it's still the same thing. I could do anything, a snap, roll, loop, but I had to stop for a 1/10 of a second now. Which one is this? And that won't work in the military, because flying is just preparation for doing something else, bombing, shooting, or something. So they made a unilateral decision that they weren't going to give me an airplane to go into combat. So I went to navigation school and graduated from navigation school. And I was flying, so it didn't matter. And we graduated in December 1942. I was lucky to we got 200 hours in January, February 1943. We got 200 hours training in B-17s. Before that, we had been in training airplanes. And I was lucky enough to get into a special project called the YB-40 project. Probably only one person in 100,000 ever heard of that airplane.
YB?
YB. Y means it was a limited production. And what it was, in 1943, January, we didn't have any long-range fighters to accompany the bombers. So they were shooting down an awful lot of bombers. So this was a stopgap. We took 13, actually the first B-17F. The first one is called the XB-40. That's one, only make one of those. Then they make a limited production called the Y models. Before it's given a definite designation. We took 12 B-17F models and put a chin turret in the nose. Before that, there was no gun in the direct front of the nose of a B-17. We put two Bendix, a turret with two machine guns in the nose, electronically controlled. We took there was a worthless gun in a radio room, which only had an arc of fire of about 30 degrees. We borrowed B-26 turrets from the B-26 bomber, again power turret, and put that in a radio room, so now we have two power turrets on top. Regular B-17Fs only had one machine gun in each waist window. We put two. And we put armor in there, and we didn't carry any bombs. All we carried was 12,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. And the theory was we would escort the bombers. We were heavy. They hadn't planned to test fly them, so we had to test fly them, make loading lists, move equipment around because they wouldn't fly the way they delivered them to us. And in April, we took them overseas. And for a while we scared the Germans, but we were heavier than a B-17 coming back because we didn't drop any bombs. We had to pull more manifold pressure to keep up with the 17s. Plus, when we landed, we were still heavy. We were hard on the brakes. We flew 9 missions in them. I flew 7 of them, and they were the Germans were afraid of them, but eventually they found out we didn't have enough of them. We would have 1 or 2 with each bomb group as escorts. So they were decommissioned, but we did accomplish this, that from that day on, every B-17 had our chin turret. That's the only feature that we kept. And all the 17s after that were known as a B-17G model. So we were happy with that. I was flying missions out of England. And on my 15th mission, we were bombing Gelsenkirchen in the Ruhr, and we got hit by flak underneath. After we got off the target, a burst of flak burst right underneath me. I was wounded from the waist down. They're only like scratches, really. I mean, a piece of maybe an inch long would go into the skin. If it doesn't hit anything, it doesn't going to do any damage from the waist down. And another burst took out the radio and the intercom and the oxygen in the back of the aircraft. We were at 29,500 feet, and then a fighter plane came in and knocked off our number 4 engine and our right wing tank. So we've got an engine that isn't working, and we're losing all the 100 octane gas out of the right wing tank. Eventually we couldn't keep up with the formation. And you can't be by yourself up there because the fighters pick you off. So we dove down to the deck. Well, the 4 gunners in the back, since they didn't have communication, thought we were crashing, and they jumped with parachutes. And 6 of us stayed with the airplane, and the pilot leveled off at about 3,000 feet, but we were right over Cologne, and it looked like they were shooting at us with BB guns. So we dove down to the deck, which is 50, 60 feet above. You'd have to pull up to avoid trees or buildings. And we headed back toward England. There were 2 fighter pilots, 1 on each side, escorting us, trying to wave us back. Eventually the pilot asked me, well, how long? And I told him. He said, we don't have enough gas. So he makes the decision. We don't argue with him. There was some of us thought, well, try to keep on. The problem is, if you keep going till you run out of gas, you don't have any control to crash land. So we found the only level spot right at the Dutch border of Germany, and we all went back. The 4 of us, the 2 of us in the front, and the radio man went into the radio room, which has a bulkhead in front of it, braced ourselves facing backwards, and then the pilot and co-pilot brought the airplane in for a crash landing. Just beautiful, one of the best I've ever seen. A lot of them break up when they crash land. He put that thing down just like it had wheels. Now we have an escape kit which has money, a map, and a compass in it. And I told the 4 men, well, Spain is that way. It's maybe 400 or 500 miles, but it's either Spain or you're going to be a prisoner in a few minutes. We had to leave one man there because he was going into shock. And we split up into 2 groups and headed south. And we walked all day. At noon, I met a Dutch farmer there, and he gave us some bread and margarine, and I gave him my St. Xavier High School ring because it had English writing on it. And I knew if we were questioned by anybody, it was a dead giveaway. We walked all day, and we were tired. At dusk, we stopped in a little grove of trees, and it was like a movie. A man came up pushing a bicycle and very mysteriously said, "I can help you." And we followed him into a small town, a town called Helden in Holland. And he fed us there, he and his wife, and he said, "Tomorrow we'll put you in with the underground resistance." So he gave us civilian clothing. I had to give up my brand new English boots, worn out pair of Dutch boots to replace them. I got this pink tone-on-tone shirt, summer pants, old shoes, and a beret, and we started south. We rode in a car one day, a German Opel, which was a Buick essentially, and it had some kind of a contraption on the back that burned charcoal or something, made a gas that made the engines run. It knocked. And people say that couldn't have been, but I remember it. But anyway, we stayed at a farmhouse. Farmer there and his wife and 2 children, and we slept behind a false wall, right under the roof, not in the room, but outside under the eaves. And if they were going to have a Gestapo search, we would go out and sleep in the fields. His wife would wake up screaming to get us out of there, and he'd say, "Well, I can't kill Germans, but I can do this." And he would, fantastic people, wonderful people. We went by train, we went walk, bicycles. Eventually we got, before we left that particular farmhouse, we got word that my pilot, who had been taken on ahead by one of the couriers, the underground, was captured in Paris. This was the start of what's called the Comet Line, C-O-M-E-T, which would help downed airmen get to Spain. We were one of the first crews that really got helped by it. Eventually it got better organized. But 2 days later we found out, well, we went down into a little town called Roermond, which was down almost to Belgium. It's on the Maas River, M-A-A-S. And we learned a little geography because we were going up the Maas River. When we get to Belgium, we were going up the Meuse River, M-E-U-S-E, from World War I Meuse-Argonne battle. Each country puts their own spelling on the name of the river, which is minutiae. We got word there that the 2 gunners had been captured in Belgium. So it was getting cold in the Pyrenees. Now it's September 1st, August 31st. And if they were captured, and probably our next contact was not safe. So we got on a train and went back up to a town called Tilburg, and the next day we went to The Hague, which is the titular capital of Holland. We would walk about 100 yards apart, so if the first man was questioned, the second man could duck into a street or a building. And I went up to this, was supposedly a safe house in The Hague, and I was hit over the head. The minute I touched the door, one man blackjacked me, another man had my handcuffs on my hands behind my back, another one had a gag in my mouth. I didn't really go out. I just sort of dazed. I sank to the floor.
This was when you walked into a safe house?
Yeah.
Somebody was waiting for you?
4 men waiting for me. The Gestapo had infiltrated.
Were they Germans?
Oh yeah, they were not. They were Gestapo. I'll get out of context, but the Gestapo and the Schutzstaffel, the SS, were animals. The average German soldier, at least of the most of them that I met, were pretty much like us. They must have known what was going on, but they would have shot us, we would have shot them, but they really didn't overstep that race relationship too much. The Gestapo and they wouldn't steal. The Gestapo and the SS, the Schutzstaffel, were all volunteers for these special duties. And they were murderers, they were thieves, they were sadists, there is nothing good you can say about them. But you got to differentiate them from the average German soldier. They took us to the federal prison in Scheveningen, Scheveningen, which is the resort town south of The Hague. And it's right on the North Sea. And the Dutch people jokingly called the federal prison the Oranje Hotel, O-R-A-N-J-E, which means orange. The royal family of Orange is the Dutch ruling, so we call it the Orange Hotel, facetiously. And we were in a cell, each one of us in a cell, solitary. But we walked in, pushed into this room. They stood us up in this hall, the two of us, and we stood there for 10 minutes or more. I started out, I was standing at attention. By this time, I got a little more courage. It's hard to explain how we felt because we had evaded capture for 21 days. And we felt we were going to be back in England the next day. And all of a sudden, it was the end of the world. So, but by this time, we had driven 5 miles in a car. We were a little more composed. And I thought, well, I'll show them, by golly. My braggadocio didn't last very long. I was standing at attention. No one was paying any attention to me. About 3 or 4 minutes, I relaxed to parade rest. And another 3 minutes, I was trying to stand up as well as I could. Eventually, they pushed me into a room. And it was like a movie. There's a big desk and a picture of Adolf Hitler on the wall. And I'm in there 4 or 5 minutes with a guard and with a gun in back of me. And eventually a man came in with this gorgeous uniform. I mean, whipcord pants, and it seemed like a knife edge, a pleat, and a crease, and polished jack boots. And he looked, as he ignores me, and he walks over and salutes, "Heil Hitler," to the picture. I didn't laugh then. I knew better than that. But he says, he looks at my clothing, he said, "This is a new American Air Corps uniform?" And I said, "No." And this went on in this vein. He was very sarcastic. He wanted to know where I had been and everything else. Well, you give him name, rank, and serial number. And eventually, I found out that he knew pretty well where I had been. So I did say that I had been shot down August 12th, 1943, at this place in Holland. What he wanted to know was the people that helped me. And I was successful in that. I didn't give them any information. But they would interrogate us for 2 hours, and then we'd go back into the cell. And they'd do it every day. And the cell was about 7 feet wide and 10 feet long, all concrete block. A ledge on the back of it, the wall, and a big sign on the wall in Dutch and in German, "Forbidden." 8 or 10 things forbidden. I don't remember all. One of them was you're forbidden to lie down on the bed from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. Well, there wasn't any bed, but anyway, you were forbidden to look out the window. There was no window. These cells were in 2 lines with a corridor in between, and there was a little transom about 6 inches high over each door. And if you could have gotten up there to look out, all you would see is the transom of the cell across the corridor. But it was forbidden to do that. It was forbidden to talk. And God gave us a sense of humor, and that sustained me. I have a lot of talk I give on the sense of humor. Funny thing happened on the way to the war. And the first or second night after the lights are out, I hear someone whistling Bob Hope's theme song, "Thanks for the Memory." And a few minutes later, I found out everybody else in this jail, except my co-pilot and I, are Jewish people on our way to Auschwitz. And yet, they had a sense of humor. This was their signal that it was safe to talk from one cell to another because the German guards were gone. And I found out a lot later that a lot of things like that God gave us a sense of humor so that you can endure. If I may regress a little, the two Dutch children in this farm where we stayed, they knew the situation, and yet they could laugh at me trying to learn to sing in their Dutch language. They thought it was funny that we wanted a glass of water to drink with our meal. They gave us gin, bowls of gin to drink. They didn't drink water with their meal. But eventually, they admitted that we were military, and they turned us over to the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, ran all the prison camps for Allied Air Force personnel. The Wehrmacht, the German Army, ran all the prison camps for the Allied Army personnel. And the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, ran all the prison camps for any Allied Navy personnel. They didn't have a lot of them because most of them went down with their ships, but they're very organized, very stratified. And we were then put on a train and sent over to the Stalag Luft 3, which is now in Poland. There's a little town called Sagan. At that time it was East Germany. It's southeast of Berlin, south of Breslau. And at that time, it was Stalag Luft 3, Luft meaning it was for Air Force personnel. And there were probably 400 prisoners there. This was September 1943, of which 3/4 were RAF. They were English, Canadian, New Zealand, Australia, French, Polish, Dutch pilots who had escaped and were flying with the Royal Air Force of England. And the rest of them were Americans, very small camp. And conditions weren't too good there. And we were in the same compound, which was a barbed wire enclosure. And Colonel Delmar Spivey was shot down. He was flying with our group. He was as an observer. And he was shot down on his first mission. And he was brought there, and being a full colonel, he was a senior American officer. And he came in, and there was a lot of bad conditions there. The British, some of them had been in there since 1939. And there was some graft going on with them, and they weren't too happy with the Americans, although they realized they needed us. But anyway, Spivey, I'll never forget him, was the finest man anybody ever served under. I thought he was old, but he was only about 12 years older than I was at that time. But he looked like a school teacher, didn't speak German, but he was the ideal man because he came in and he said, "We're going to run this like a camp in the United States. You don't have to salute me walking around, but we're going to clean it up. When you get razors, you'll shave. We'll clean up the barracks." And he was able to work with the German colonel. The German commander was a Colonel Oberst von Lindeiner. I have a picture of him there. And he turned out to be a reasonable man as much as he could. And he knows that escape stuff is going on. And we know that he knows, and it's a game. I want to put in here that probably the worst day in a German prison camp, at least in my experience, was probably better than the best day in a Japanese prison camp. There's no question about that. We did things in that prison camp that we would have been killed immediately. We were fed better, not by the Germans, but by the Red Cross. The Red Cross kept us alive. The standard Red Cross parcel was a half a cubic foot, 6 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches. I'll get into that a little later if we have time. August 12th, we lost about 12 aircraft in the 8th Air Force. But August 17th was the biggest mission to that date. We lost 60 airplanes, that's 600 men. So there are a lot of prisoners coming in then later on in end of August and September. The camp was in a pine forest. There were 3 compounds there, separate enclosures, and at this time Americans and British were in the same compound. The German ration would not have kept us alive. We were allowed to have Red Cross parcels. The Geneva Convention people were allowed to come in 2 or 3 times a year. We were allowed to have a theater. We were allowed to have a library. I was a librarian there in the center camp, so I got to read a lot of books. And the Red Cross, the YMCA, and other organizations would send books, or your parents could send money to a publisher, and they would send books. May I go back to flying the mission? Well, no. This is not going to be a very good order, but I have a few things about flying missions. And this is part of a funny thing happened on the way to the war. We were issued infantry helmets in England, which are fine if you're on the ground and someone is shooting at us, but they wouldn't fit over our oxygen mask or intercom, so we didn't wear them. But one navigator in another crew always took his on a mission. And we finally asked one of his guys, what does he do with that helmet? His name was Goat Baker, because he had more dates than anybody else, and one date he came back and he said his date said he smelled like a goat. But he always took this GI helmet, and his gunner said, oh, he said, Baker says he don't use his head very much, but he knows what he wants to protect. He sits on that helmet. So, even if you had a bad mission, if you looked over there at his airplane saying, that idiot's over there, it lightened it. You've heard of the White Cliffs of Dover. They're chalk cliffs, maybe 200 feet high, running for miles along the east coast of England. And if we're coming back from a mission at a reasonable altitude, 25,000 feet or more, and there are no fighters bothering us, you could come in with even 2 engines out and drag your airplane in over those cliffs. And the British had 2 airfields. They had bulldozed the land between them, so if you didn't have any brakes, you could just drag it in and run it out. You were home. So it always looked like home. No matter how bad we were shot up or how many missions we flew, my nose gunner would sing out as soon as he saw them, there'd be bluebirds over the White Cliffs of Dover. And the tail gunner would always say, what makes those cliffs so white, Joe? And 7 gunners in one voice would say, it's all those bluebirds. There were always hundreds of German fighters, and there was one fighter squadron at Abbeville, France. If we were going on a southern raid, we went right over Abbeville, or right near it, and these German fighters would take off. And they all had Focke-Wulf aircraft, would have radial engines, round engines, and their cowlings were all painted bright yellow. So they called them the Abbeville Kids, or the Yellow-Nosed Squadron. You take off, you're going to go on a mission. They get you up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you go down and you have breakfast. And I thought it was humorous, if you're going on a mission, you get fresh eggs. Otherwise, you had to eat powdered eggs, and there's a message there. I don't know what it is, but it was ironic. Boy, we got fresh eggs this morning. And they would go down to the briefing room then, and they would have a map with a red ribbon running over here to the target. They tell you the importance of the target, how many fighters you're going to see, how much anti-aircraft you're going to have, different things like that to help you fly the mission. And then when you come back, you're shot up, maybe you're tired, you're dirty, you're hungry and thirsty. You have to be debriefed by the intelligence officer. And it is intelligence, it's not intelligent. Because half of the intelligence officers had never been in combat, didn't know what they were talking about, and they would debrief you. And I had 2 gunners when we got shot down on our 23rd mission. But one of the missions before that, we're coming back on this end. Hey, did you see the target? Yeah, we bombed the target. Did you see any fighters? Oh yeah, we saw lots of fighters. Was there any yeah, there was anti-aircraft fire. They said, well, now did you go over Abbeville? Yeah, we went over Abbeville. Did you see those fighters? Did they have yellow noses? And this one gunner said, no sir, he said they had big noses, red noses, and big square goggles, and a white scarf hanging from their helmet. And this guy's like, wait a minute, that's World War I. And you want to get out of there as quick as possible. You gotta go back and get some lunch and get shaved and cleaned up. All along during the war, in the prison camp, there were things like that. We were allowed to have a theater, and we were putting on a play, the front page, a newspaper play, and there was one soldier dressed up like a woman. And we're having this play, and we see over here out this barracks window, there's what we call a purge. New prisoners being let in have been shot down, some of them just days before. So there's tremendous rapport in this prison camp. Everybody is happy. So we had this man dressed like a woman try to dash out of this building where we were putting a play on in this woman's dress, screaming, and someone pulled him back in. And these men, new men, couldn't help but see him. We know what's going to happen. That afternoon or someone of them's going to say, he's going to think of, where's the women? We said, geez, you shot down a week ago and you're around the bend already? There's no women here. I saw a woman. No, you didn't see a woman. And we could keep that up sometimes for half a day. And they may not be that funny to people who don't realize what it was. But there was a tremendous outhouse outside in this compound, and you use that during the day to relieve yourself. But at night you're locked in. Shutters are all closed and everything. So there was a trough for a urinal in the end of the barracks, which led out to the outhouse. But there was no flush toilets anywhere, not even in the outhouse. But at the end of this barracks, there was a box about 3 cubic feet, 3 feet on a side, which Red Cross parcels had come in. There was a bucket in there. And the unwritten law was that if you had to have that kind of a movement, the first man to use that bucket had to empty it in the morning. So the barracks is 135 feet long and 130 or 40 men in it, sleeping in double and triple decker bunks on mattresses. There was a mattress cover filled with wood shavings, which rustle. And so the lights go out, and there's 130 or so men there, and it's quiet. All you hear is rustling of these mattresses as people are rolling, and they're lying there quiet with their legs crossed because they have an urge to do something they can't do right then. And eventually, you hear the bed creaks when they get out, and they tiptoe down this long hall to the end of the hall, and they tiptoe back, and the minute they're back, then there's a deluge. Everybody has to go down and relieve themselves in this thing. It doesn't sound so funny now, but it was. I lost my train of thought there. The Red Cross parcels, when transport was good, the Red Cross parcels came in, and you would get one parcel maybe every 2 weeks per man. And there would be a 12-ounce can of Spam or corned beef. There would be 6 ounces or so of sugar. There was a 4-ounce ration D bar, which was an unsweetened Army ration chocolate bar. There was Nescafe. There was powdered milk. There were crackers, and occasionally there would be 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes. And what we would do, we would form families, essentially, called a combine, 8, 10, or 12 men. Because if you ate your 12-ounce can of Spam on one day, you didn't have any for the rest of the week. So we would pool 3 cans of Spam and then split them up between 12 men. Each man would get a slice of Spam with his meal. The Germans didn't give us any potatoes, they gave us turnips. And none of us will ever eat another turnip. They were big, they were pithy. When you get potatoes you get turnips instead of potatoes, you get turnips instead of everything else. It's not. Once a week, maybe they would give us some kind of meat in a soup. One time we had one, there was an eye staring back at us out of the soup. They put the whole cow's head in it. We got blood sausage once in a while from them. A couple of mornings a week we would get a sort of a porridge, maybe oatmeal or something like that. And we got enough bread. We got black bread. It was very heavy. A loaf of bread weighed 2 kilos. Weighed a kilo, which is 2 pounds. Very heavy bread. It produced a lot of flatulence. It didn't taste good the first day, but after a while, it tasted really good. It tasted like brown bread. You'd get a new prisoner and say, I can't eat that. And we were very patient with him. You really can't eat it? No, well, we'll eat it for you. But after about 3 days, you were eating the brown bread. We got British Red Cross parcels once in a while. And they were essentially the same, except they had different meat. They had tea instead of Nescafe. So I was there about 2 weeks. Am I rambling too much? I was there about 2 weeks, and this American major came into barracks, and he said, "Doolan, yes, I understand you were loose for 21 days. You evaded capture." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why don't you go out and play volleyball?" I went out and I played volleyball. I don't know what's going on. I mean, here's coming in order to go play volleyball. I'm out there, we're outside the barracks, and everybody's shuffling their feet around and playing volleyball, and all of a sudden a bucket of sand would come out the window. And we kick the sand around so that it's not the same, so it's the same color as the other sand. You have to do that because otherwise it's a different color. If you scrape the top layer of sand off, which the sun has dried, it's a lighter color than the sand which is underneath, which is damp. So you not only have to get rid of the sand, you have to conceal it. So we would get rid of it that way. There's no tunneling going on in this barracks. It's coming from another place. It's an enormous amount of sand you have to. If you dig a hole, it's a cubic feet. When it's compacted, it's going to be almost 1.5 feet, cubic foot and a half. So you have to get rid of sand, and you have to shore the tunnel. It's all sand. Each of our double and triple decker bunks had 7 bedboards. They're about, well, they were 30 centimeters wide, enough 2.5 feet. And so we would commandeer a bedboard from each bed for shoring the tunnel. There's a picture of the tunnel over there. Eventually, you might need another bedboard from somebody, and if you took too many, the guy fell through, which didn't make him happy. But we would then found out we could get some rope from stuff coming in, and we would substitute rope instead of bedboards. And
was everybody in on the tunneling?
No, we didn't know the phrase, but it was a need to know.
So certain people would organize that.
Colonel Spivey said, "It's a matter of American merchandising. If every prisoner could give a German a cigarette wouldn't have any value. But if only the escape committee could deal with the German, they could tame him." So none of us were allowed to, we could talk to the Germans, but we couldn't do anything else, not give them anything. So the escape committee would go to a German guard and they would say, "Would you like an American cigarette?" "Oh, it's a big," "Well, I couldn't do that." "Oh," I said, "No one's here." He says, so he'd smoke a cigarette. 2 or 3 weeks later, 10 days later, have another cigarette. Yeah, okay, so, and 3 weeks later, "We want you to get us some." "Oh, I couldn't do that." I said, "Well, you don't want the German, you don't want the colonel to know you're smoking American cigarettes, do you?" So now he's in a bind. And you have to be careful which guards you tame, because you might have one that turns out that he's going to be a double agent. So eventually we had some guards that were, I didn't do any of this. I couldn't get down in the tunnel. I did security up on top. But then we would get, eventually they wanted a camera, and they were able to get a camera. We wanted film. We wanted railroad schedule.
You got it from the guards?
Yes.
Through the bribing?
Right. Then they set up an organization in Washington, and we had means of getting code messages out that we wanted things. We wanted some radio parts. So this man, I had a customer here in town, P. Goldsmith's sons, who later became McGregor Goldsmith, you may have heard from, made baseballs, and then eventually Brunswick bought them. But anyway, they made baseballs. I had nothing to do with this, but another Cincinnati and Dave Pollock did. This colonel came down from Washington with these radio parts and a little aluminum egg, sort of like the one's legs, like plastic leg sausage, hosiery thing, you know. And he went to P. Goldsmith, either Phil or Hugo Goldsmith, the owners, and said, "We want to put these in baseballs, and wind them up." So they do it at night. They put these little radio parts in these baseballs, and then put them in boxes with a special mark on them. Then they would launder this by sending them to someone who ordered baseballs and paid for them, like with Ben Franklin stores or anything. And they would send them to the prison camp. And then in the prison camp, we had to see that the Germans didn't X-ray that box, or that you didn't start hitting fly balls with those balls. And by this time, we had 6,000 prisoners there. The Germans can't open every package without help, so we had Americans helping them in the receiving room out there, and they would catch the specially marked boxes, and so they wouldn't be captured. Same time, we wanted escape maps. So we contacted U.S. Playing Card Company here in Cincinnati, and they printed these escape maps on the back of on a playing cards, and then they printed in one sheet. Then they cut them up into cards, and they coated those maps then with the pips or the face card faces. And those boxes were marked special, so that when they came to the camp, we put those cards in water, and may I get up? They would hand me that book, my book. I'm sorry. They would. We could make the map, and then now this is not a small operation. This is most. The British wanted to get 200 men out in one night. That's part of the escape map.
So you would have to put it together like a puzzle.
You put it together like a puzzle. Then we made it. You're not old enough to remember the ditto machine. It was before mimeograph. It was a gelatin wheel or drum, and you put indelible ink. You type it with indelible ink, purple ribbon, or we got indelible pencils, and we would scribe this map in. We melted margarine, and we got some gelatin from home, and put it in these 9 by 12 pans that we had made out of tin cans, and then we would scribe this map in reverse on there. Then you could just take paper and run it over, and it made a dozen maps rather than draw 12 maps all at once. On here it even showed where this is a brickyard with a chimney, so that for a landmark. It showed don't cross the river here, it's too deep. There are German guards here. So that's the way we got escape maps.
So did they get the 200 guys out?
They got 3 men out. I'm sorry, they got 76 men out. And the tunnel was 400 feet long. There's a movie about it, The Great Escape, which is a good movie, but it's a true movie. And the tunnel unfortunately broke. Instead of in the trees, it broke about 20 yards short in a lane where the guards walk up and down. 76 men got out. The 77th man pokes his head up out of the ground, and an German soldier almost falls over him. His gun goes off, and it's pandemonium. But 76 men had gotten out. 3 men got back to England.
What happened to the other 73?
Of the 3 men, 2 were Norwegian pilots who made it to Stettin and then got to Sweden. They spoke Norwegian and German. The 3rd man was the only one I knew was Bob Vanderstock, who was a Dutch pilot, and he had the advantage of being about the 4th man out of the tunnel. So he was in town at the railroad station before the alarm went off, and he got the first train out of there, and he got back to Holland, then they flew him back to England. They captured 73, and Himmler sent an order down, and they machine gunned 50 up to put a stop to this. They tried to claim they were shot resisting the capture, but they made the mistake of letting us see them alive after they were captured, and they executed 50 of them. It's a great movie. You should see it.
I saw the movie. Now that you say that, I remember.
Now, the only thing that wasn't true there, all those things happened in the camp. He did not steal a motorcycle. He did not steal an airplane, and he was not American, James Garner, because by this time, as I said, we were in the same compound. By mutual agreement, they moved us Americans out of that compound so that there was no friction between the American, and we got American Red Cross parcels, they got English, they like tea, we like coffee. But other than that, it's a true movie. All those things happened.
Did you guys get along pretty well
Yeah,
amongst each other?
We did. Oh, yeah, there was not really much at all. No stealing. I think one time someone got caught stealing. How's the time?
That's good. Keep going.
What time is it?
You got 17 minutes.
Okay, okay. Can you think of anything?
Oh, tell me about, did you get, when you got rescued?
Got to get out of there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in
Now
this.
it's what year? 1944?
I spent 2 Christmases there. Christmas 1943, our slogan was Home for Christmas 44.
Did you guys know that the big invasion was coming?
Oh yeah, we had the German radio.
So you knew the invasion was happening?
Yeah, we know right away. Yeah, we had the German radio and German newspapers.
But you're pretty far into Germany.
Oh, way into.
That's a long way.
Oh yeah, we're not.
But you're still hopeful at this point that maybe this is the end coming?
As I say, home for Christmas, well, this is before the invasion now. The invasion was June 44. Christmas 43, our slogan is home for Christmas 44. Christmas 44 came and we had the invasion, which was an up, but we had the Bulge, which was down. Now our slogan was, after New Year's, it's 45 and we're still alive. And in January 45, it's bitter cold. Oh, I have one more, I think, humorous thing. I was known as the chocolate king. If I had anything, I would trade it for chocolate. I didn't need cigarettes. I didn't need another pair of socks. If someone had a ration D-bar, I would trade it with it. So everybody in the camp. But anyway, I wanted ice cream. And that's kind of ridiculous, but I still eat ice cream almost every day. We have powdered milk. We have a chocolate bar. We have sugar. We didn't have any nuts, but we had some dates. And if you chop a date up, when it gets frozen in ice cream, it's just the same texture as a nut. The Germans, we made our own cooking pans out of tin cans, but the Germans had given each combine a big aluminum basin. So my co-pilot and I went out, bitter cold, in deep snow. We made a nice thick batch of powdered milk with chocolate and sugar and dates in it, and held a wooden stick in there while he turned us in the deep snow. And eventually, it didn't get hard as ice cream, but it got about like iced milk, this soft milk. This one German guard came up and he says, what's doing? He said, I said, tunnel. He said, crazy Americans. We could joke with some of these, the ones who could speak English. There was one German, they had German ferret. We call them ferrets because they crawled around under the barracks. Barracks are at that high off the ground. So they could look under there to see if you were digging.
Oh.
And Glemnitz, his equivalent of Master Sergeant Glemnitz, he was reasonable German. He would have shot us and we would have shot. This one day, the German captain comes into Colonel Spivey's office and says, you got to stop these men. They're trying to kill one of my guards. Well, every morning, the Germans issued us hot water for tea. And someone got the bright idea, we'll scrub the barracks floor, which has cracks in it, because there's a guard snooping around underneath there, so they're pouring water through these cracks. And this German lieutenant, or captain comes in to Spivey, and he says, look, he says, this is going to stop. And Spivey, he said, well, you know, I told these men we're going to have a clean camp. They're clean. And he said, no, they're not cleaning the camp. He says they've got a surveyor out here on each side of the building directing where to pour the water. So he said, if you don't stop it, we'll get no more hot water. But anyway, now we're January 1945. The Russians are within 50 miles.
How do you know?
Got the German newspaper.
So they know, they have it in there, and they know.
And you can hear Russian airplanes.
So you can hear artillery.
And so now they tell you, you're going to be evacuated. We're not going to surrender you to the Germans, to the Russians. So this time we had a pretty good supply of Red Cross parcels there. We were allowed to carry whatever we could carry. So any of us that had 2 pairs of trousers, we tied the bottoms of the legs together, put a rope through the waistband. You could load that with cans of Spam and cigarettes, butter, not butter, coffee, and anything that was worth carrying. And we would haul out. You got a backpack. On January 27th, they said, we're going out tomorrow, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning on the 28th, we marched out of there. 8,000 men on the road. We looked like an army. We were afraid that some fighter pilots would think we were an army. But anyway, bitter cold, there's a foot of snow on the ground, and we walked all the rest of that night from 3 o'clock, and all the next day, and we came to a little town called Halbau, H-A-L-B-A-U, and Colonel Spivey was with us, and he got the Germans to let us camp there overnight in a lucky of us, 2,000 or so got to be in a big Lutheran church. A lot of other ones had to sleep out. So we had men under the altar, on the altar, everywhere around. The minister allowed us in there. Just as a mark of how Spivey was, the Germans came in to tell us we had to get out, and Spivey, they said, we've got a railroad car here for you, Colonel Spivey. And Delmar Spivey said, how many railroad cars do you have? And he said, one. I said, well, I know. He says, if my men walk, I walk. I mean, this was just the finest man anybody. Oh, the Germans were just discombobulated because they didn't understand. They got on telephone to Berlin. Eventually, they had to let him march. And we marched, we walked about 8 miles that night. We walked about 8 miles. The next night, we came to a small town where we slept in the farm barns. And then we walked about another 12 miles to a town called Muskau, M-U-S-K-A-U. There was a pottery factory. They made these tiles, red tiles, and oh, there was furnaces in there. We had heat and hot water, and we stayed there 2 nights. By this time, the snow's starting to melt, and by February the 5th, we reached a town called Spremberg, and they finally just put Spivey in a machine gun almost and said, you're going to ride this way to Berlin. So they took him, and the rest of us got put in French boxcars, 50 men in a car. There wasn't room for all of us to do anything but stand up. And eventually, we had our blankets. We made hammocks with wire up on the roof, so, inside, so we could people could sit down. We were locked in there for 5 days, going down near Munich, a town called Moosburg. And we got there were probably 50,000 prisoners there in a camp designed for 30. By the end of the war, there were 110,000 prisoners there, of every nationality. Sikhs from India, all the Allied nations, and no sanitation. There was excrement all over, no showers. It was pretty bad. April 28th, 29th, we know that the Allies are near, and Patton's army comes in, and tanks break down the wire. The Gestapo people tried to resist them. The Luftwaffe guards were willing to surrender, but the Gestapo didn't want to, and so they had a pitched battle there, and by about noon, the American flag went up and the German flag went down, and Patton came in on his tanks, and in his Jeep, I mean, and he said, well, I can't get you out of here, but we'll get you some food. And he brought a field army bakery, and he baked white bread. The Russian prisoners thought it was cake. And we stayed there for another, till May the 8th, and they flew C-47s into a little airport, air base by the Danube River, and flew us to Le Havre, France. And we were in Le Havre for a couple of weeks, and then they got on a ship, and I thought I was coming home to New York, and we're out at sea. We're going to Trinidad. We thought, oh, rum and Coca-Cola. They wouldn't let us off. They had 2,500 prisoners on there. If they'd have let 2,500 prisoners off in Trinidad, Port of Spain, Trinidad, it would have been a while getting us back on, so they didn't let us off the ship. But, I had gone down to 140 pounds, and first day on that ship, I bought a box of cigars and a box of 24 Hershey bars. And I ate almost the whole box the first day. And we got to Trinidad, we're sitting on the deck of that ship, sun burning, and when I got home, if I stood up, I looked like a zebra, where you get a little fatter. I got creases, black, white, where I was sitting there. I had creases when I stood up. I looked like a zebra. But I went from 140 to 175 pounds in almost nothing. And
did you have any long-term physical problems from being a prisoner for so long?
For a long time, I couldn't eat restaurant fried stuff. The shortening did. And if you cut yourself, it took a while to heal. But no, other than being crazy, I mean, no, the Lord's been good to me. I have some fragments in me yet, but they don't bother me.
And you got the Purple Heart, right?
So I got 2 Purple Hearts.
That was from the flak?
From the flak and from the being wounded with the pistol whip when they captured me. But I did lose my teeth. I mean, I ground them all down. I don't know when I was grinding them. But not too long after the war, the dentist said, well, you got to replace them. And the lower teeth were down. So all my teeth have been replaced.
And how many months were you a prisoner total?
Counting the time we were escaping, 21 months.
You were a second lieutenant when you went in?
Right,
When you were a prisoner?
yeah.
And then
I
the
was up
war?
for promotion, but it didn't go through till I got out.
So
I
what
came
was
out
your
of first
final
lieutenant.
rank? First lieutenant?
Yeah.
So how did you guys feel when you finally saw those American tanks and flags?
Oh, they looked like angels. I mean, there were some British men who'd been there since 1939. They kissed the ground. They were all little vignettes. One soldier in the tank corps of Patton's army liberated his father, who was in the prison camp.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, there were amazing reunions like that. Brothers meeting brothers, and they were when they did get, as I say, they got some bread into us, and later on they got some more food. More food. We stayed there, say, from April 29th till May the 8th. Got on a ship, then we finally did get back to New York, and first thing I got off the ship, they handed me a pint of milk, fresh milk, and an orange. I think I did have an orange on this ship coming back.
So everything must have tasted so good.
Oh, it was different. I made, we did our own cooking in the prison camp. We had a big stove at the end. But at Mooseburg, we had to make improvise. You know what a Girl Scout Smoky Joe is? We made those so we could cook stuff. And then we got a little fancy. I got a picture one there, I think, maybe, of deluxe stove. We didn't put a blower on it. You could turn the crank and it forced air up with it, and that would make it really hot. And you could get a big pot up on top of it, a pan on top of it to cook.
Did you ever see any civilian German people around when you were in that camp?
No. Sensors. They had sensor or mail, and the same sensor would always censor your mail, so she would get a feel if you were trying to sneak anything in there. And they were women, civilians, 20, 25 years old. 12 years after the war, we had a reunion in Norfolk, Virginia, and Colonel Spivey had kept track of a lot of people, like Glemnitz, the German guard. We brought some of the censors over to our reunion, 3 of them. And this was amazing. This one woman, she comes in and she's got a bag of mail. She says, I can't explain this. We had to evacuate the camp along with you, naturally. The Russians are coming. I had this bag of mail. I had censored, all get proof marked and everything. I took it home. I don't know why. She said, I put it in a closet and I forgot about it. She says, then these years later, she brought it with her. This bag of mail which we had written 2 years or 10 years before. And she pulls out a letter. She says, anybody write to Joseph Schneider in St. Louis? And this guy's son was with us there. He said, I wrote that letter to my father. And he got this letter. So little things like that happen.
Did you ever get your ring back?
No. I wrote to, let's get that picture. I wrote to that photograph of the airplane. I wrote to one of the underground over in Holland. He said, that's it. We weren't allowed to send any gold out of the country. But anyway, 58 years after the war, I get a call. There's a man in Germany took a picture of our airplane on the ground right away. We didn't know this. And what do? You put it in a closet, in a shoebox. 58 years later, his son sees it. He says, I'm going to find out. He gets on the email to our War Department, and he told him about this insignia here. And they gave him the 92nd Bomb Group email. He emailed them, and they called me and said, is that your airplane, 229884? I said, yeah. He said, this guy's got a picture. I got in touch with him, and he went into a little town and got a negative made, and he sent it to me. These are the 2 fighter pilots that were chasing us. We didn't know anything about this. We were long gone. But I got this wonderful picture of the aircraft on the ground.
Isn't that amazing? After 58 years.
And last year my daughter went over there and met a Belgian man who took her up to where my airplane crashed. and there's a little church there. That church is just still there. And she went right to this field where I had crashed. That's the way the Lord's been all along.
Did you ever go back?
I never did, no. I didn't have the money, and Sandy wouldn't fly the ocean anyway. She'll fly to Denver. I don't know what the difference is, but we never, we thought we'd like to see the rest of the country first. I'd love to go back. 'Cause
Well, that's an
Holland-
amazing story. You've got a few minutes. Anything else you want to tell us for the record?
Did I say anything about the Depression?
No.
Well, the big thing I talk about the Depression, we weren't poor. We just didn't have money. But we had family, we had friends, we had neighbors. Everyone was in the same condition. You pooled your resources. You took clothing, you passed it down, then you altered it. When you couldn't alter it anymore, you cut it into strips, or women wove rugs out of it.
Do you think that experience helped you as a prisoner?
Oh, I think so, sure.
All those Americans were so
Oh.
used to being so resourceful.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I mean, we made, as I say, we made the mimeograph, we made compasses. You take an old phonograph record, which was black rubber, you get it in boiling water, cut a disc out of it, make a die, and you make a box, cut a razor blade up to get a needle, magnify it. A phonograph needle would be a pivot. We made compasses. We made maps. We made civilian clothing out of uniforms. You scrape that, it looks like serge. Then we had to dye it, because you can't have a civilian clothing made out of all sorts of things.
Do you think those Germans knew what you were up to?
Sure they do, but they got to find out where you're doing it.
So you were just real clever about
Yeah.
keeping it all
The
secret.
tunnel that got out at the same time the British were digging 3 tunnels, Tom, Dick, and Harry, so that if one got caught, they still had one going. In fact, the last one that got out, they had found a previous one. We would trade, we'd steal from the Germans. They'd bring a truck in there and leave it unguarded for a minute. We'd steal the blind out of it.
You guys were a real resourceful generation.
Well,
You made good soldiers, I think, because of that.
a lot of them had college education, because you had to have that to be a pilot before they see. So a lot of them were
Smart.
and educated. We had school teachers there. We had engineers there. We had all sorts of educated people, and we didn't really think we were doing anything unusual. Everybody was in the service. We were doing a job.